Hello friends, it's the Stitches. In January of 2019, I announced that I would no longer be buying any clothing from fast fashion brands. Currently, we are almost halfway through 2024, which means I have been more or less fast fashion free for 5 years. In that time, I've learned a lot about ethical and sustainable fashion, and the way in which I approach garment shopping has changed dramatically. If you're already here, you're probably well aware of why fast fashion is bad, so I'm not going to go over that in this video. There are already so many resources out there that discuss the issue at length. Documentaries, articles, YouTube videos, it's been covered. What I do want to discuss is how giving up fast fashion has changed my relationship with clothing consumption. First of all, I believe that where you buy your clothing is not nearly as important as how often you buy your clothing. The real problem with fast fashion is right in the name. The high speed at which it is produced is the source of basically every major issue in the industry. So if you buy clothing from ethical and sustainable brands at the same rate that you used to buy clothing from places like Forever 21, Shein, Zara, H&M, etc., that's still a problem. Obviously, it is better to buy clothing from sustainable brands, but it is still possible to overconsume. You may be buying higher quality pieces, but if they're still being treated like they're disposable, then that's not really any better for the environment. That being said, for many of us, and this was particularly true for me, we're simply too deep into the habit of overshopping that it's really difficult to just turn that part of our brains off. What do we do to celebrate good times? We buy ourselves a little treat. What do we do when we're feeling sad? We buy ourselves a little treat. It can be difficult to cut yourself off from shopping because it's just kind of part of our culture. Hands down, the hardest part of my whole sustainable journey was just learning how to not shop. In the first couple of years, I still definitely overconsumed by a lot. Even if I did quit buying fast fashion, I was still in and out of the thrift store constantly. I still spent at least an hour a day scrolling through Depop, if not more. It wasn't until I started setting time limits on certain apps on my phone that I started to realize just how easy it is to get stuck scrolling on Depop for hours at a time. So I wasn't necessarily buying any less, but it was just the source of my shopping that had changed. Changing the source was the easy part. It was addressing why I wanted new things and teaching myself to be grateful for what I already had. That was the hard part. I am still very much in the phase of teaching myself how to say no whenever I want something new. I will say though that I have gotten so much better at it. It's so much easier to walk away from a purchase than it used to be, but I do have to stress that that was absolutely not an overnight process. It has taken me all 5 of those years to get to this point. If I do have something I really need and I've decided to allow myself to buy something, then I still prefer to buy secondhand, mostly for budget reasons. But as I said, it has to be something that I've already identified as something that my wardrobe is actually missing. There was no longer any such thing as, oh, this item is cheap, so I'll just get it. Or, oh, I just need $10 more to get that free shipping, so I'll just look for something else to buy. Unless I actually need the thing and I don't have anything else that will work in the meantime, I do not get the thing. If I have identified a need, like for example, I wore out my everyday walking shoes, so now I need a new pair, then I will search for the best version of that item that I can afford. Sometimes, more often than not, the best of the best simply just isn't in budget, but I would so much rather have one really nice pair of shoes than 5 mediocre pairs of shoes. Getting out of that hyper-consumerist mindset of always wanting new items, never feeling like I have enough. Oh, my wardrobe would be so perfect if I just had this and this and this. It's really difficult, and it can be really hard to make it seem like it's not just a punishment for past over shopping, especially in the beginning, but it is so worth it. I feel like I really appreciate the clothing that I have so much more, and it feels really great to discover new outfits that I can make with clothing that's already in my closet. If anything, I feel like I have way too much stuff now. Eventually, over time, I want to pare down my wardrobe to only the things that I love and wear regularly. And when something does wear out, I only want to replace it with things that I love just as much and are just as special to me. But since I'm not shopping as often, I'm actually using the clothing I have more often and holding on to them longer, I've gotten a lot pickier about quality. A basic from somewhere like Shein just isn't going to last long enough for my needs. It's just simply not worth it to buy those items even if they do cost less initially. One thing you will learn real fast is that if you have a small curated closet, then the items in that closet are going to wear out a lot faster, just due to the simple fact that you're putting them on your body more and washing them more. The more you actually wear your clothes, the more important it is for them to be well constructed out of high quality materials. For example, if you buy, say, a $10 t-shirt from somewhere like Forever 21, you'll probably be able to make it last a year or so before it starts to degrade. You know, it fades, starts to get holes, maybe some of the seams start to fall apart. And at that point, it will be demoted to pajamas or yard work clothing. In comparison, a high quality t-shirt from an ethical and sustainable brand that's made out of a higher quality cotton is going to be more expensive, probably in the $50 range, but it will last you so much longer. A high quality, well constructed t-shirt can easily last you over 5 years, if you take proper care of it. When you consider cost per wear, yes, the sustainable brand is more expensive up front, but over time, it's really about the same. Obviously, I know not everybody can afford that $50 up front, especially with the economy being what it is right now. But buying higher quality where you can and getting deals secondhand where you can really makes the difference in the longevity of a wardrobe. This is also part of why buying new clothing as infrequently as possible is so important. Logically, the less clothing you buy, the more money you'll save, and then the more money you can invest in higher quality pieces. Because clothes really aren't supposed to be this cheap, disposable thing that we discard so easily. We've never been expected to own as much as we do at this point in history. 60 years ago, it was totally normal to have one nice winter coat, one nice handbag, a couple nice pairs of shoes. Wardrobes used to be pretty small until very recently. And if you're only buying what you need, you can stretch your budget much further. If you only have $100 to spend on new clothing this summer, do you want to use it to buy 10 $10 items that either won't survive to next year or will be wildly out of trend by next year? Or perhaps 2 high-quality $50 items, or even one $100 item that's really nice that will last you for several years to come. But at this point, I've been talking for quite a while, so let's take a short break. And we have returned. I'm a millennial, horrifying, I know, and I was a preteen in the MTV Cribs era. At the time, everyone wanted to emulate these celebrities with massive walk-in closets. And I feel like that was really the beginning of fast fashion becoming normalized. I remember being a young teenager and having a subscription to Vogue magazine, and there was an advertisement for an H&M dress in one of the issues. And it was this big deal because it was this really affordable dress that anybody could buy in one of the most respected fashion magazines in the world. At the time, you flipped through fashion magazines for inspiration. You didn't actually buy the clothes. No one could afford the clothes. Around the same time, I really fell in love with this Alexander McQueen coat that was also in a Vogue photo shoot, and I was well aware that I would never be able to afford it. It was literally a $45,000 piece of couture clothing, because yes, they did have the prices. If you flipped to the back of the magazine, all of the prices were listed for every item that was in the photo shoots, and oh my god, they were shocking. For reference, my mother had just bought a new car for $15,000. One coat could have bought 3 cars. I was never gonna own the coat, but I still had a picture of it on my wall because I just loved looking at it. It inspired me to design my own clothes that I could sew over the weekend, and to put pieces together from items that I could afford that could give similar effects and textures. And that was how I originally interacted with fashion content when I was in middle and high school. Nowadays, most people get their fashion inspiration from influencers on social media. Sometimes celebrities, but let's be honest, the line between the two has gotten thinner and thinner over the years. And we do actually aspire to own the exact same items that these influencers are wearing. You look at what is probably a sponsored post on Instagram, and all of the items that the model is wearing are tagged. You can go straight from the photo to the brand website and are usually able to find the exact same item that you can then add to a cart and have delivered in a few days. Even if the items aren't fast fashion, there is still very little thought put into the whole process. You could easily argue that fashion spaces have become more democratized, and that isn't inherently a bad thing. But I feel like with the way that we interact with fashion now, the way trends move in and out so much faster than they used to, that there's really just no passion to it. When I was younger, interacting with fashion content forced me to become creative so that I could wear the styles that I liked. And now all I have to do to wear those same styles is open an app, click a link, add to cart. So moving forward, I really want to change the way I interact with fashion. I want to go back to that mindset of looking at beautiful clothes and not seeing them as something to buy or an object to own necessarily, but rather as pieces of art to take inspiration from. And I'm really no longer interested in chasing popular aesthetics, putting myself into easily digestible, taggable boxes for a social media algorithm. I want to wear what makes me feel good without feeling any need to label it. So that's just kind of where I'm at mentally right now. So before I finish up this video, I want to talk about some statistics. In 2022, the Hot or Cool Institute, which is this environmentalist think tank, released a report defining fair fashion consumption for mitigating climate change based off of scientific research. In the report, they suggest that a sufficient wardrobe that meets a consumer's basic needs consists of approximately 74 items, which includes shoes, for a 2-season climate and 85 items for a 4-season climate. Of course, this does not account for every single person and every single lifestyle. If you pursue a hobby or a sport that requires specific protective clothing, that would not be included in this. And if no other action is taken to reduce environmental impact, then the purchase of new garments should be limited to 5 items a year. Again, this is a loose guideline. They identify 5 key actionable lifestyle changes that impact the sustainability of fashion consumption by reducing carbon emissions. Those lifestyle changes being reducing the purchasing of new clothes, increasing use time, reducing washing and drying, buying secondhand clothes, and responsibly disposing of garments. The most impact in carbon reduction being made by reducing purchases and increasing use time. So all of this information really just reinforces things that I've already said earlier in the video. My main goals right now are to just reduce my consumption as much as possible and to actually use what I own as much as I can. I'd say the thing that has changed the most for me over the last 5 years is how I envision what sustainable fashion is and what it looks like. It is not just going to the thrift store and never buying from H&M. It is just not that simple. There is so much more nuance to this conversation. I think a sustainable wardrobe absolutely can include items newly purchased from fast fashion brands, so long as those items were intentionally purchased and well cared for. Because sustainable fashion to me is intentional fashion. If you really only bought 5 new garments a year, each item would have to be thoroughly thought out ahead of time, because there's just no wiggle room for impulse purchases. If we really only purchased 5 new garments a year, companies like Shein just wouldn't be able to exist. The industry would not be able to look the way it does now, because the only way that the fast fashion business model can thrive is through overconsumption. That's the only thing keeping it afloat. That being said, I probably will end up buying more than 5 garments this year. And I really don't expect anyone watching this to pressure themselves to buy that little, especially if you are just starting out on your sustainable fashion journey. I will say, however, that so far this year I have only purchased 3 garments, and they were all secondhand. And that is not something I ever would have achieved 5 years ago, not this far into the year. So I'm pretty proud of myself. I'm not perfect, and I will never pretend to be perfect. As full disclosure, there are a few items that I have had to purchase from fast fashion sources over the last 5 years. Really just like a small handful of items. And I only did so because I simply didn't have any sustainable, affordable alternatives at my disposal. And I just don't think that making one fast fashion purchase a year for something I desperately need is suddenly going to brand me a liar. I just simply refuse to submit to such black and white thinking. I really don't think that we have to be that rigid with ourselves. My sustainable fashion journey has taken the path that it has because that was what felt right for me. And what feels right for you will probably look wildly different. My only intention for making these videos is to share my experiences with you all, and hopefully give some tips or insight into what sustainable fashion is and how it works, but not to judge anyone for having to buy fast fashion, because sometimes that is simply the only option available. I personally don't judge anyone for their consumption habits, and I don't think anyone watching this should either. Unless you're like a millionaire making $900 Shein hauls, even though you absolutely could afford sustainable alternatives. But that's also not the average person. I think that is where I will wrap this up. That's all I really have to share today. If you have any pressing questions for me, feel free to leave them in the comments down below. And thank you so much for watching this far if you're still here. And I will hopefully see you all next time. Bye!